It was a typical Wednesday evening when my life took a turn I could have never anticipated. I was sitting in my study, catching up on some work emails, when an anonymous message popped up on my screen. The subject line was stark and foreboding. "You need to see this." Curiosity piqued. I hesitated for a moment before clicking on the attachment. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The video started playing, and there she was. Betty, my wife of 10 years, wrapped in the arms of another man. The grainy footage showed them in a dimly lit room, their silhouettes unmistakable. They were kissing passionately, their bodies intertwined in a way that left no room for doubt. For a few moments, I sat there in stunned silence, unable to process what I was seeing. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke. But as the video continued, the reality of Betty's betrayal became undeniable. I watched in horror as the man in the video whispered something into her ear, making her laugh. A sound that had once brought me so much joy now felt like a dagger to the heart. They moved together with an intimacy that spoke of more than just a casual affair. This was something deeper, more insidious. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And why had someone sent me this video? I rewound the video, watching it again and again, each replay tearing another piece of my heart apart. The shock was overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing over me, pulling me under into a sea of disbelief and pain. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of my desk, struggling to keep myself anchored in the face of this devastating revelation. Betty had always been the center of my world. We had built a life together, shared dreams and weathered storms side by side. To see her with someone else, to see her so effortlessly betraying everything we had, was a blow I never saw coming. Every touch, every kiss in that video felt like a mockery of our years together. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right then and there. But I was paralyzed by the weight of my emotions, trapped in a maelstrom of anger, sadness, and confusion. How could she do this to me? To us? As the video came to an end, I sat back in my chair, numb. My mind flashed back to the countless times she had come home late, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences. Every suspicious moment now fit together in a cruel puzzle of infidelity. At that moment, my world shattered. The foundation of trust and love I had built with Betty crumbled into dust, leaving me with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. The morning after receiving the video, I awoke with a sense of purpose fueled by anger and betrayal. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a burning need for answers. Who sent me the video and why? What was their motive for exposing Betty's infidelity? Sitting at the kitchen table, the remnants of my untouched breakfast growing cold, I stared at my laptop, the anonymous email still open on the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated my next move. There was no sender information, no name or address, just the video and a cryptic message. "You need to see this." I decided to start with the basics. I began by examining the email itself, looking for any hidden clues. The sender's address was a generic, untraceable one, a common tactic for those wishing to remain anonymous. But I noticed something odd. The timestamp of the email indicated it was sent in the middle of the night, around 2 a.m. This suggested the sender was either a night owl or someone deliberately choosing a time when they knew I'd be asleep. Next, I reviewed the video frame by frame, hoping to spot something that could identify the location or the other man. The room was dimly lit, with few distinguishing features. However, a painting on the wall caught my eye, a landscape I had seen before. It was an original, part of a limited series. Betty had mentioned it once, a piece she admired at a gallery event we attended together. Could it be that simple? Was this man someone from that event, someone who had crossed our paths before? I jotted down the details of the painting, intending to investigate further. But first, I needed to dig into Betty's life in a way I never thought I would. I hacked into her email and social media accounts, something I felt guilty about but justified given the circumstances. Scrolling through her messages, I found nothing out of the ordinary at first. But then, I came across a series of emails from her boss, Henry. They seemed innocent enough, work-related, polite, professional. But there was an undercurrent of familiarity that made me uneasy. Switching tactics, I decided to confront Henry indirectly. I called his office, pretending to be a potential client interested in their services. As we chatted, I probed subtly about his team, asking about recent projects and the people involved. He mentioned Betty several times, praising her dedication and hard work, but his tone shifted when he talked about their late-night brainstorming sessions. There was a hint of something more, something personal. Feeling like I was onto something, I hung up and continued my investigation. I reached out to a friend who was an IT expert, asking for help tracing the email. He agreed, albeit reluctantly, and promised to get back to me as soon as he had any information. In the meantime, I kept a close eye on Betty. I watched her interactions, her phone calls, and her texts, looking for any slip-up, any clue. The more I observed, the more I realized how much she had changed. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the sudden influx of money, all pointed to something deeper, something more insidious. Days turned into weeks, and my friend finally called with the news. He had traced the IP address of the email to a location downtown, Henry's office. My suspicion had been correct. Henry was involved, but why had he sent the video? Was it a warning, a power play, or something else entirely? Armed with this new information, I felt a mix of vindication and dread. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, revealing a picture more disturbing than I had imagined. But I wasn't done yet. There were still questions that needed answers, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. The initial shock of the video had worn off, replaced by a deep, gnawing pain and an overwhelming sense of disappointment. Everywhere I turned, I was confronted with memories of the life Betty and I had built together, now tainted by her betrayal. Sitting alone in our once cozy living room, I felt the weight of our crumbling marriage pressing down on me. The photos on the mantelpiece, snapshots of happier times, now seemed like cruel reminders of what we had lost. Each image told a story of love and trust that now felt like a distant dream. I found myself wandering through our house, each room filled with echoes of our past. The kitchen, where we had spent countless evenings cooking and laughing together, now felt cold and empty. The bedroom, once a sanctuary of intimacy and comfort, had become a place of restless nights and bitter thoughts. It wasn't just the physical spaces that hurt. It was the emotional landscape of our relationship that had been irreparably damaged. I recalled the late nights waiting for her to come home, the growing distance between us, and the subtle changes in her behavior that I had tried to ignore. All those little moments, once insignificant, now loomed large, casting shadows over our years together. I struggled to understand how we had gotten to this point. Was there something I had done or failed to do that had driven her away? Had our love not been enough? These questions haunted me, gnawing at my soul and leaving me feeling more lost and broken with each passing day. Betty's betrayal had not just shattered my trust in her, it had shattered my trust in myself. I questioned my judgment and my ability to read the people I cared about. How could I have been so blind? The man she was with, Henry, was someone I had considered a mere acquaintance, a colleague of hers who I thought nothing more of. The realization that she had chosen him over our life together was a blow I struggled to comprehend. Friends and family began to notice the change in me. I became withdrawn, avoiding social gatherings and retreating into my world of pain and confusion. They reached out, offering support and sympathy, but their words felt hollow. How could they understand the depth of my despair when I barely understood it myself? At night I lay awake, replaying the video in my mind, the images burned into my memory. I couldn't escape the vision of Betty in the arms of another man, her laughter and affection now directed at someone else. The future we had planned, and the dreams we had shared, all seemed to dissolve into nothingness. One evening, as I sat in the darkened living room, I picked up a photo of our wedding day. Betty looked radiant in her white dress, her eyes filled with love and promise. I remembered the vows we had exchanged, the commitment we had made to each other. For better or worse, we had said. But this was a betrayal beyond anything I could have imagined. The realization that our family's future had been torn apart by her actions left me feeling hollow. I had always envisioned growing old together, building a life filled with love and shared experiences. Now, that vision seemed like a cruel joke, a fantasy that had been shattered by deceit and lies. In my darkest moments, I wondered if I could ever find the strength to move forward. The pain of betrayal was a wound that cut deep, and I wasn't sure how or if it would ever heal. The family and life I had cherished had been irrevocably changed, and the path ahead seemed uncertain and fraught with sorrow. As I sat there, consumed by pain and disillusionment, I knew one thing for certain. The idyllic life I had once believed in was gone. Betty's betrayal had destroyed more than just our marriage. It had destroyed my faith in love and trust. Now, all that remained was the task of picking up the pieces and finding a way to rebuild, even if it meant starting over from scratch. I knew the conversation had to happen, but that didn't make it any easier. With a heavy heart, I sat across from Betty at our kitchen table, the place where we had shared so many meals and moments. Today, it felt like a battlefield. "Betty, we need to talk," I began, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She looked up from her phone, a look of mild curiosity on her face, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. "Sure, Michael, what's on your mind?" she asked, her tone casual. How could she be so calm when my world was falling apart? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I received something disturbing," I said, reaching for my laptop and opening the anonymous email. "This video, Betty. It shows you with another man." Her face paled as she watched the video play out on the screen. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked, but then her expression hardened. "Michael, I don't know where this came from, but it's not what it looks like." I felt a surge of frustration and anger. "Not what it looks like? Betty, I saw you with my own eyes. How can you say that?" She shook her head, her eyes wide and pleading. "Michael, someone is trying to ruin us. This has to be a mistake or a setup. You have to believe me." I wanted to believe her, I did, but the evidence was undeniable. "Betty, it's not just the video. There have been too many late nights and too many unexplained absences, and now this. You need to be honest with me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held her ground. "Michael, I swear on everything, I have never been unfaithful to you. This is some kind of sick joke. Please, you have to trust me." Her words cut through me, leaving me torn between the woman I loved and the undeniable evidence. "Betty, how can I trust you when everything points to you betraying me? If there's an explanation, now is the time to tell me." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Michael, I love you. I would never do something like this to you, to us. Someone is trying to destroy what we have. Please, you have to believe me." I looked into her eyes, searching for the truth. Could it be a setup? But who would go to such lengths to tear us apart? And why? My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. "Betty, if you're telling the truth, then we need to find out who is behind this. But if you're lying—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The pain was too much. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, Michael. We'll figure this out together. I promise." Despite her assurances, a seed of doubt had been planted deep within me. The video, the late nights, the changes in her behavior, they couldn't all be coincidences. But for now, I had to give her the benefit of the doubt, if only to find the real culprit behind this nightmare. As we sat there, holding hands across the table, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could get through this. But the shadows of doubt loomed large, and I knew our journey was far from over. Betty's denials lingered in my mind, but so did the lingering doubt. I needed to be sure, to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Driven by this relentless need, I began my search for irrefutable proof. It started innocently enough. Late at night, while Betty was asleep, I accessed her laptop. She had always been careless with her passwords, trusting in the privacy of our home. It didn't take long to crack into her email account. My heart pounded as I navigated through her inbox, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. At first, there was nothing, just mundane work emails and correspondence with friends. But then I found a folder labeled Archived. It seemed innocuous enough, but something about it caught my attention. I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. There, buried among routine emails, were messages from Henry, her boss. The subject lines were ambiguous, but as I opened each one, a clearer picture began to form. Their exchanges were subtle at first, filled with professional jargon and polite conversation. But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. The emails became more personal and more intimate. My hands shook as I read through their correspondence. "I can't wait to see you again," Henry had written in one message. Last night was unforgettable, Betty had replied. My stomach churned, the bile rising as the reality of their affair sank in. But I needed more. I had to be certain. I navigated to her phone records next. I installed a monitoring app, one that could track her messages and calls. It felt invasive, wrong even, but I was beyond the point of no return. Over the next few days, I monitored her conversations closely. As Betty went about her daily routine, unaware of my silent investigation, I watched and waited. And then, the messages started to come in. Texts from Henry, filled with affection and longing, interspersed with plans for their next meeting. It was all there, laid out in front of me. The late-night messages, the secret rendezvous, the promises of a future together. Each piece of evidence was a dagger to my heart, but I pressed on, collecting and compiling everything I could find. The most damning evidence came one evening when Betty left her phone unattended. I scrolled through her message history with Henry, finding conversations that spanned months. They talked about their plans, about how they would keep their relationship hidden until the right moment. There were photos, too, intimate pictures that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. With each discovery, the foundation of our marriage crumbled further. I saved everything, the emails, the text messages, the photos. I created a dossier, a comprehensive collection of her betrayal, meticulously organized and dated. It was painful, methodical work, but it had to be done. Finally, I had everything I needed. The proof of her infidelity was irrefutable, a collection of digital evidence that laid bare the extent of her deceit. It was devastating, but it was also liberating. The truth, as painful as it was, had set me free from the uncertainty and doubt that had plagued me. As I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, I felt a strange sense of calm. The journey was far from over, but I had taken the first crucial step. Armed with the truth, I was ready to confront Betty once more, this time with the undeniable proof of her betrayal. The evidence I had gathered weighed heavily on my mind, but there was still one more person I needed to face. Henry, Betty's boss and lover. I needed to hear the truth from him, to understand his role in this sordid affair. I managed to track him down after work one evening. He was leaving the office building, walking towards his car in the dimly lit parking garage. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached him, a mixture of anger and determination driving me forward. "Henry," I called out, my voice echoing in the space. He turned, surprise flickering across his face as he recognized me. "Michael," he replied, trying to mask his unease with a calm demeanor. "What are you doing here?" "I think you know why I'm here," I said, stepping closer. "We need to talk." He glanced around nervously, but there was no one else in sight. "All right," he conceded, "let's talk." We stood there, facing each other, the tension palpable. "I know about you and Betty," I began. "I've seen the messages, the emails, I know everything." Henry's expression shifted, a mix of guilt and resignation. "I see," he said quietly. "I suppose there's no point in denying it." "No," I agreed, my voice hardening. "But what I want to know is why. Why did you send me that video?" For a moment he seemed to wrestle with his thoughts. Then he sighed deeply. "Because I love her," he admitted. "And I couldn't stand the thought of her being with you. I thought if you knew the truth, you would leave her, and then she would be with me." I felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of pity for this man who had so brazenly interfered in my life. "So you sent that video to destroy our marriage?" I asked, incredulous. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Yes, I thought it was the only way." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea the pain and devastation you've caused?" "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And I'm sorry, Michael, I truly am. But I love Betty, and I thought this was the only way to be with her." His words hung in the air, a painful reminder of the betrayal I had endured. "Well, you've succeeded," I said bitterly. "You've destroyed our marriage. But you haven't won, because Betty will never forgive you for this, and neither will I." He looked up, a flicker of hope dying in his eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. I just wanted you to know the truth." "The truth?" I echoed, shaking my head. "The truth is you've ruined lives, Henry, and there's no coming back from that." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit garage. The confrontation had given me some of the answers I sought, but it had also deepened my resolve. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this betrayal define me. I had to move forward for my own sake. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of closure. The confrontation with Henry had been painful, but necessary. Now, it was time to face Betty one last time, armed with the full truth and ready to make the final decisions about our future. When I returned home, I found Betty sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She must have sensed the confrontation with Henry had happened, and she was waiting for me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." I sat down across from her, the weight of the day's events pressing down on me. "Yes, we do," I replied, my tone steely. She took a deep breath, her eyes flickering with the struggle to find the right words. "I know you confronted Henry," she said finally, "and I know that he told you everything." I nodded, my gaze unwavering. "He did, and now I need to hear it from you." Tears welled up in her eyes and she looked away, unable to meet my stare. I can't deny it any longer," she whispered. "I had an affair with Henry. It started months ago, and I know it's no excuse, but I felt so lost, so disconnected from everything. I felt a lump forming in my throat, but I swallowed hard, refusing to let my emotions overtake me." "Why, Betty?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you do it? Was it for the money, the position, or something else?" Her tears began to fall freely now, and she buried her face in her hands. "At first it was the attention," she admitted. "He made me feel valued and important. And then it became about the money, the position. I wanted to give us a better life, but I lost sight of everything that mattered." The room was silent, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to feel anger, but all I could feel was a profound sadness for what we had lost. "Betty," I said quietly, "you betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage, our life together. How can you ever expect me to forgive that?" She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice hoarse. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm truly sorry, Michael. If I could take it all back, I would." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This woman, whom I had loved and trusted, had shattered our lives with her choices. And now, faced with the reality of her actions, she was seeking forgiveness that I wasn't sure I could give. "I don't know what happens next," I said finally, my voice breaking, "but I do know that things will never be the same." She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "I understand," she whispered, "and whatever you decide, I'll accept it. I just want you to know how deeply sorry I am." As I stood up from the table, I felt the enormity of the situation pressing down on me. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: the trust and love we had shared were forever changed, and as much as I wanted to forgive her, I wasn't sure I ever could. I walked away, leaving Betty to her tears, knowing that our lives would never be the same again. The road to healing, if it existed at all, would be long and fraught with pain. But for now, all I could do was take it one step at a time, grappling with the shattered pieces of our once whole life. After leaving Betty at the kitchen table, I walked into our bedroom, the room we had shared for so many years. The familiar surroundings now felt foreign and suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing, my heart heavy with pain and disappointment. I stared at the framed photos on the dresser, snapshots of happier times, vacations, family gatherings, moments of pure joy. Each image was a painful reminder of the life we had built together, a life now shattered by betrayal. The pain hit me in waves, crashing over me with an intensity I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the act of infidelity that hurt. It was the lies, the deceit, the erosion of trust. Betty's actions had torn apart the very fabric of our relationship, leaving behind a gaping wound that seemed impossible to heal. I buried my face in my hands, feeling the hot sting of tears. I had loved her deeply and trusted her completely. We had built a life together and shared dreams and aspirations. And now, it felt like all of that had been ripped away, leaving me adrift in a sea of confusion and heartache. Memories flooded my mind. The way she used to look at me with love in her eyes, the late-night conversations about our future, the quiet moments of contentment we had shared. How could she have thrown it all away for the sake of ambition and greed? How could she have chosen another over me, over us? The more I thought about it, the deeper my disappointment grew. I had always believed that we were stronger than this, that our love was unbreakable. But now, confronted with the harsh reality of her betrayal, I felt a profound sense of loss. The woman I had once known, the woman I had pledged my life to, had become a stranger. I stood up and began pacing the room, unable to sit still. The walls seemed to close in around me, the weight of my emotions threatening to suffocate me. I needed to escape, to clear my head, to find some semblance of clarity amidst the chaos. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house, not caring where I was going. I just needed to get away, to put distance between myself and the source of my pain. As I drove aimlessly through the city, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clung to me like a second skin. The night was dark, and the streets were quiet, mirroring the emptiness I felt inside. I parked near a secluded park and got out, needing to feel the cool night air on my skin. I walked aimlessly along the paths, my thoughts a tumultuous storm of anger, sadness, and confusion. I knew that I couldn't stay in this limbo forever, that eventually I would have to decide our future. But for now, all I could do was grapple with the overwhelming pain and disappointment, trying to come to terms with the shattered remnants of our life together. As I sat on a bench, staring up at the starless sky, I realized that this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The love and trust I had once had for Betty were irrevocably damaged, and whether or not we could ever rebuild from the ruins remained to be seen. The days following Betty's confession were a blur of pain and confusion. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions, each wave pulling me further from the shore of stability. In this turmoil, I knew I couldn't navigate this storm alone. I needed the support and advice of those closest to me. One evening, I decided to reach out to my best friend, Mark. We had known each other since college, and he had always been a steady presence in my life. I dialed his number, and after a few rings, he picked up. "Hey, Mike, long time no hear. How are you?" His cheerful tone felt like a lifeline. "Mark, I need to talk. It's about Betty. Can you meet me at our usual spot?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but the strain was evident. "Of course, man. I'll be there in 20, he replied without hesitation. We met at a small, cozy bar we had frequented for years. As soon as I saw Mark, the weight on my chest lightened slightly. We found a quiet corner, and I poured out the whole story. He listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to anger and back to empathy. "Mike, I'm so sorry you're going through this," he said when I finished. "You don't deserve this. No one does. But remember, we're here for you, no matter what." His words were a balm to my wounded heart. We spent the rest of the evening talking, his unwavering support providing the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in days. The next morning, I called my sister Laura. She lived a few hours away, but she had always been my confidant. When I told her what had happened, she was shocked and furious on my behalf. "Mike, you need to take care of yourself first," she advised. "Betty's betrayal is on her, not you. Come stay with us for a while if you need to clear your head." Her offer was tempting, and I promised to consider it. For now, just hearing her voice and feeling her protective love was enough to bolster my resolve. Lastly, I turned to my parents. They had always been a solid foundation in my life, and I knew their wisdom would guide me. Sitting in their living room, I recounted the painful events. My mother gasped, tears welling up in her eyes, while my father sat silently, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Son," my father finally said, "betrayal like this is never easy to handle. But remember, you are not alone. We are here, and we will support you in whatever decision you make." My mother's embrace was warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold distance I felt from Betty. Their reassurances gave me strength, reminding me of the love and support that still surrounded me. As I drove back home, I reflected on the conversations. The advice from my friends and family had varied, but the underlying message was the same. I was not alone. Their support gave me the courage to face the difficult path ahead. I knew that the decisions I had to make would not be easy, but with their unwavering presence, I felt a renewed sense of determination. In the days that followed, I continued to lean on my friends and family. Their insights and perspectives helped me see the situation more clearly. They reminded me of my worth, reinforcing that I deserved honesty and loyalty in my relationships. As I sat in my living room, surrounded by the comforting silence of the night, I knew that this journey was far from over. But with the love and support of those closest to me, I felt a flicker of hope that I could rebuild my life, piece by piece, and find a new path forward. The days following my conversations with friends and family were filled with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. As the initial shock and anger began to subside, I found myself standing at a crossroads, faced with the daunting task of deciding the future of my marriage and family. Sitting alone in the quiet of our living room, I tried to envision what the future might hold. The memories of Betty and I together, the laughter, and the shared dreams, all felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The betrayal had tainted those memories, making it difficult to reconcile the past with the present reality. I spent hours reflecting on our relationship, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. Were there signs I had missed? Red flags that I had ignored? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the cracks had been there all along, subtle yet persistent. Her late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the sudden influx of money, these were all pieces of a puzzle that I had been too blind to see. As I sat there, lost in thought, I began to consider the different paths that lay before me. On one hand, I could try to salvage our marriage. We could go to counseling, work through our issues, and attempt to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But the thought of forgiving Betty, of moving past the betrayal, seemed almost impossible. The pain was too raw, the wound too deep. On the other hand, I could choose to end our marriage. Divorce was a terrifying prospect, filled with its own set of challenges and uncertainties. It meant starting over, facing the unknown, and dealing with the fallout from our families and friends. But it also meant reclaiming my sense of self, my dignity, and my future. I thought about our children if we had them, and how this decision would impact them. The idea of breaking up our family was heartbreaking, but I knew that staying in a toxic relationship would be just as damaging. They deserved to see a healthy, loving relationship, and I wasn't sure I could provide that with Betty anymore. The more I contemplated, the more I realized that there was no easy answer. Both paths were fraught with pain and difficulty, but deep down, I knew that I had to make a choice that was true to myself. I couldn't continue living in a state of limbo, caught between the past and the future. One evening, I took a long walk through the park, letting the cool breeze clear my mind. As I walked, I thought about what I wanted from life, what I needed to feel whole again. The answer slowly began to crystallize in my mind. I wanted honesty, respect, and loyalty. I wanted a fresh start, unburdened by the weight of betrayal. Returning home, I felt a sense of calm determination. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it head on. I would have to have a final conversation with Betty, to tell her my decision, and to start the process of moving forward. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary for my peace of mind and for the future that I wanted to build. As I prepared to speak with Betty, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write on my terms. And though the future was uncertain, I felt a renewed sense of hope and strength, knowing that I was finally taking control of my life. After much contemplation and soul-searching, I came to a decision that weighed heavily on my heart. I needed to file for divorce. The betrayal had irreparably damaged our marriage, shattering the trust and love that once bound us together. It was a painful realization, but staying in a relationship tainted by infidelity would only prolong the agony. With a heavy heart, I began the process of legally ending our marriage. I contacted a lawyer, gathered the necessary documents, and prepared myself for the emotional and logistical challenges ahead. It wasn't just about severing legal ties. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth and paving the way for a future free from deceit and heartache. As I signed the divorce papers, I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. Sadness for the dreams we had once shared and the family we had hoped to build together. Relief knowing that I was taking the first step toward healing and rebuilding my life. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, legal meetings, and emotional upheaval. There were moments of doubt and moments of clarity. But through it all, I held on to the belief that I was making the right decision for myself and for any children we might have. Betty and I had a final somber conversation where we acknowledged the end of our marriage. There were tears, apologies, and a sense of closure that allowed us to part ways with a modicum of dignity intact. As I walked away from that chapter of my life, I carried with me the lessons learned and the resilience gained from surviving such a profound betrayal. I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but I also knew that I was capable of rebuilding, of finding happiness again on my terms. The decision to divorce wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about reclaiming my future, my happiness, and my sense of trust in others. And as I closed the door on this painful chapter, I felt a glimmer of hope for the new beginnings that lay ahead. With the divorce finalized and the emotional turmoil gradually subsiding, I embraced the opportunity for a new beginning in my life. It was time to leave behind the hurt and betrayal inflicted by Betty's actions and focus on rebuilding myself. I immersed myself in work, throwing myself into projects that challenged and inspired me. It was a welcome distraction, a way to fill the void left by the end of my marriage. Through hard work and dedication, I found solace and a renewed sense of purpose. Outside of work, I reconnected with friends and family who had been my pillars of support throughout the ordeal. Their unwavering presence reminded me that I was not alone and that there were people who cared deeply about my well-being. As time passed, I gradually rediscovered the joys of life that the pain of betrayal had overshadowed. I explored new hobbies, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and allowed myself to dream again. Through it all, I learned valuable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of self-care. The wounds left by Betty's betrayal had healed into scars, reminders of a chapter in my life that had shaped me but no longer defined me. Looking back, I realized that the end of my marriage had been a catalyst for personal growth and self-discovery. It taught me to trust my instincts, prioritize my happiness, and never compromise on my values. As I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I felt a sense of peace and optimism about the future. I was ready to embrace whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead, confident in my ability to navigate life's twists and turns with grace and resilience. Betty's betrayal will always be a part of my story, but it no longer holds power over my happiness or my future. I had chosen to forgive, not for her sake, but for my peace of mind. And in doing so, I had reclaimed control over my life and set myself on a path to a brighter tomorrow. As I moved forward, I carried the lessons learned and the strength gained from overcoming adversity. With each step, I embraced the promise of a new beginning, grateful for the opportunity to rewrite my story and create a future filled with hope, joy, and fulfillment.